Hi, David. It's Paula. How are you?
Hi, Paula. I'm fine.
Thanks for talking.
Sure.
I kind of realized as I sat down to write and I was working on the outline that I needed to go further back. They want me to submit the first chapter, and it feels
Uh-huh.
like I can't really. I mean, the stuff we've talked about has been hugely helpful, and it really helped me
Hmm.
conceptualize the outline and what I want to talk about in the book. But if I
Mm-hmm.
if I get to write it, but I think backing up and talking about the formation of the Silver Jews and you know the
Yeah.
concepts, the earlier details are kind of important to setting the
Yeah.
stage. So I
Well,
really appreciate
certainly,
you.
yeah. I mean, it's not like, I don't know. I mean, even if you wrote about the Rolling Stones, I guess you'd have to start about the beginning, but certainly with an obscure subject,
I try not
as
to
a
be
Silver Jews, you
linear,
can't
but
just leap into it.
I try not to be linear in general, but it sometimes is necessary. So,
Yeah, sure.
can I?
Well, do you want me to do that on the, were those some of the questions or that you sent me,
Yeah.
or?
Well, I would love to know some
Okay.
very specific details so that I kind of have a framework. Like for example, when did you graduate from UVA? And
Yeah.
did you and Steve and Bob graduate at the same time?
Yeah. Do you want me to answer those now
Yeah,
or in the
I'll go
email?
through.
Okay.
I'll go through a couple of smaller questions.
Okay. Um, Bob and Steve was a year older than us, so Bob and I in um, May of '89. Steve in May of '88. And let's see. So uh, Steve graduated. He went back to California for a while, and then he went on a tour of the Middle East. I think he went back and maybe made his first 7-inch. Then he went on a tour of the Middle East, just as a sort of student backpacker type. And we graduated in '89, and by I think near the end of graduation, no, it was in the summer after graduation that Steve's single, the first Pavement single, came out. I remember going because I was living right after graduation. I moved to Austin, and I remember going to the Sound Exchange and seeing it and trying to. I kept putting it in the front of all the 7-inches, trying to, promote it. Just put it in front of the pile. But and then at the end of that summer, Bob, who'd always said and always, or at least for a while, had always announced he was going to move to Hoboken after school and get a job as a bus driver because he drove a bus at the university, and he enjoyed doing that. And he did go up there and got an apartment and in Jersey City, or it was really Hoboken, right on the top of the hill of Hoboken. So it's called Hoboken Heights or Jersey Heights. I don't know what they call it now. And Steve and I both sort of, me in Austin and him in California, both decided to go and live with Bob. And so we both showed up there around the same time, I think. And we lived there, and I think Bob first tried to be an air traffic controller, but the stress got to him of the testing and didn't work out. And he did eventually get a job as a bus driver for a ferry service.
Is this
ferry
1989?
To New York.
This is 1989.
This was the very end of the year of '89. So December, I would say that we were all up there at the same time. Maybe November.
How long did you all live together there at that apartment?
There, I think in the, probably through the, I think in May, probably, he moved down to Hoboken proper, to Willow Avenue, which is Willow Avenue in like 11th Street in Hoboken. It was just like 3 or 4 blocks from Maxwell's. And then he got like a little basement apartment. And so Steve and I would like move out and try and pick up stakes at other places, and we moved back and live with Bob again. And at the time before he had moved down the hill to Hoboken, Steve and I were both working at the Whitney, and around that time I found an apartment in Greenpoint that was like $300, and so I moved out. And at the very same time, about the same time, Steve, we had become friends with this guy named Jim Coleman, who was the projectionist, the AV guy at the Whitney, and he had his own little projection room, and he was in the band Cop Shoot Cop, and his name was, he had a pseudonym, anyway, he's a keyboardist, and he had an apartment in South Williamsburg, and so Steve moved into his extra room there, and then so that was through 1990, into 90.
Okay.
Yeah, I say through 1990. But we would all, we would always be at Bob's in Hoboken. So, and it was, it was like, it wasn't even a question that you could like live in Manhattan. It just seemed impossible for, even back then, for the amount of money we made. So we would be living either in Brooklyn or Hoboken. And it was, it was normal to just go back and forth in one night or spend a couple days over there in Hoboken or get lonely,
I think you described in an earlier conversation how you all would just kind of get off work, go drink some beers and play music and just like record.
Yeah.
I'm curious, is that kind of the strategy or the way that the Arizona record was made, or the Diamond of a Reef? Is that what you were doing?
Yeah, that's what we were. That's where the tracks came from. I don't know why we were. The story always was we would make up songs, just hang out. That's what we would do. But sometimes it would be things like we'd start at work, because Steve and I'd be guarding on the same floor. Or even if we weren't, we would like on our break, we would like, quickly walk by the other one and like shove some paper in our pocket, because we were constantly just trying to amuse each other. We both had a pen and paper. That was like, for me, a time of enforced creativity, because I had to stand there for 6 or 7 hours a day. So it was really, if I hadn't had that job, I don't think I would have put anything together. The job artificially made me disciplined as a creative person. Before that, I I didn't know how to work and or get enough work done. And part of being around the Whitney, and because of the nature of the art, because I wasn't familiar with 20th century contemporary art in any real way, it was there was so much stuff to bounce off of, and there were so many things to mimic or try, or so we would come home and there would be those notebooks, and it would be easy to just pull out like a page, look at a page that I had just written 40 song titles for, or like the things that showed up on Steve's, that showed up as lyrics for his first album, or just things from the Whitney, just language and phrases and titles. And there's a lot of, I think that if you actually went and sat down with the lyrics, or I did, I could actually point out, like, oh, well, these references are to actual certain installations and certain shows and pieces, or there's stuff in there about other guards and stuff like that. So that was it. Wasn't we didn't have other friends. We were like we would guardedly watch when we would go to a show at the Pyramid or something, and we'd see the people from like a band. We'd be really impressed to see like people from the Dust Devils or Live Skull or something like that. We'd see if we see John Spencer or something like that from a distance. But we didn't have. It wasn't. New York was. You could go to shows and shows and shows and never meet anyone. I mean, it was just like the manners were different. People, it was a tough, people projected a tough image, and it was somewhat, the music was, that progressive, post Big Black, Laughing Hyenas type, roaring type music, and it was non-sexual. Like I don't think we ever got laid. None of us. It was amazing. I mean, like, people don't believe it, like, because of the way sexual politics are now. But it was impossible. It was impossible. I mean, there would either be no women at shows, or you couldn't strike up a conversation, or it would be forbidding or foreboding. And so there weren't parties to go to. So that's what we did after work, is we were in this basement apartment, and we we were all college graduates, but there weren't jobs like the kind of jobs that became just a surplus of like by 95 or 96, jobs in like the culture industry. They just didn't exist. If you knew someone who was like an assistant at a gallery who answered the phone, they seemed super important. Like they had a real big leg up as a gopher or something like that at a minor gallery. So anyway, I think that was, we were confused probably about what we were doing. It was, I think 1989 or 1990 was like the worst job market there had been since the Depression at that point. And so we were all lucky we were really lucky to have a union job and have those benefits. And Bob's job was a good job. And, but after work, we were, especially Bob and I, when we would drink, we would fight a lot. And so there was a lot of tension, and there was a lot of just, we could be mean about the world and everybody around us. But then sometimes when we would get together and there was no one else to pick on, we would sort of set it on each other or something, I think, a little bit. So, anyway.
How did you meet originally, Steve and Bob? And, what was that like in college?
Bob, I met, I think in pretty much the first week of school. And that was, fall of 1985. And he wasn't like anyone I'd met before. He was, just extremely friendly. He and I shared a lot in common as far as interests. He really brightened my, when I was with him, he always brightened my mood a lot. And, I don't know how long it took us to really start hanging out with each other, but at UVA, our interests, we were really interested in music, and again, like in New York, it would be different, so much different today. There really weren't. There weren't. You almost felt like there were like 20 people in your class who might, in the whole 2,000 people who might be, who might go to the Dead Kennedy show or something, or it was the interests of our peers was, it was like a time in music in 1985 where, especially at a pretty conservative university, where people were primarily interested in the Grateful Dead, on one hand, and then that would be sort of the older, more sophisticated type people. But the regular type kids would be really interested in the music that was popular on the radio, which, when I think back upon it, was older. It was music by an older generation, like Billy Joel, and there was also the kind of music like, Phil Collins or Mike and the Mechanics. There were people who, I don't know how old they were literally. They must have been 30 or older, but it was typical of people my age always growing up that there wasn't a culture servicing our cohort. Like, it was from the early 70s as kids, it was a low point in the society's interest in children. And it was a high point in adult self-interest. And so, the books and the toys and the things that were really actually the most amazing were things that were from the decade before, or from the 50s, really. And the things that, I would think were really amazing were things that I would see on TV would be things that were made for children a long time ago, like cartoons, the great cartoons, or the Mickey Mouse Club, or even the Brady Bunch was from an earlier time. And so it wasn't really until the mid-'80s, when we got to be around 18 or 19, that it switched back again, and then really in the 90s, for sure, where children became a focus and became treasured and valued again. But for most of my time growing up, we were like an afterthought, surviving on the backwash of the baby boomers, the last of the baby boomers, their pleasures. And so, and I've even seen it described somewhere that when the baby boomers grew up when, who are like the youngest ones are maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years older. I don't know where the exact cutoff is, but that they took youth with them in a way. And at that point, youth became not a time in your life, but became just a quality that anyone would have. So sometime in the 70s, maybe around disco, and definitely through the 80s, fun was for the people just older than us. And then when we got to that age, 13 in 1980, 15 in 1982, this is like right when the sexual revolution turned off. It's right when AIDS came. It's right when the don't do drugs, just say no came. So, it was like it was an unfortunate situation for us, and we always talk about this, people my age, in retrospect, that we're also sandwiched between like a time of youthful hedonism on one end and a time of youthful hedonism on the other. But in between, we were, we existed in a time where people had drawn back, and because the young people had become really conservative, and even the clothes, like for instance, I remember in the 90s when women started to wear tight clothes or wear red lipstick, things that you just never would have seen in the years we were in college. Women wore baggy clothes and baggy sweaters and had perms or frizzy hair. The sort of the cliches of what men find to be most feminine traits, like long hair and tight clothes, and these things were just not in existence. So the mood was one where there was this sort of, quote unquote underground is what we called music, but there wasn't a corresponding social underground. If there was any kind of hedonism going on, it was like in the fraternities, where we would never pass through. We would just hear about, and so, a lot of our activities were like taking acid. It was just a bunch of guys taking acid, and I think the music of that time was really influenced by that kind of partying, sort of a non-sexual interest in just sort of what was fried. It was antisocial. And so I would say that, Bob was different because he was interested in that same culture that we would call, quote, underground. But I think that Steve and I would be, we were more cynical, and more, I think, in a way, truly nerdy and Bob, I don't understand the typology of nerds and dorks or whatever, but I think Bob would be the kind of nerd that would make people feel comfortable. Steve and I would be the kind of nerds that would make people uncomfortable, but not because they thought we were better than them, just because we just didn't have the social skills to be at peace with ourselves and sort of too high self-awareness, too self-conscious, things like that.
Did you meet Steve early on when you were at school, or did it take longer to meet him?
I met Steve, it was the same, a couple months later, and it was, so probably, I think I have the ticket stub of this concert, and might have been November of '85 or December, but I got a ride with a guy named Ken Ganfield, who I knew slightly, who he was a DJ at the radio station, and his interest in music were really far out to me. He was interested in throbbing gristle and things like that, and what at the time people called industrial, which had a totally different sense than it did later. But he was going to drive up to a concert to see The Cure in D.C., and a lot of times he would go see shows in D.C. Not very many shows came to Charlottesville, so he would go to Richmond or D.C. And this was at I think it was at George Washington or the Patriot Center or something like this. It was a big place, and so it was me and a female friend, and we were in the back seat, and Ken was a year older, so we were first year, and he and Steve was in the passenger seat. He was second year, and I didn't know him, and I was intimidated by just both of them being older, and so they were playing music that was beyond me, like Can and things like that. And so I don't know that we, necessarily hit it off or not. I probably didn't talk very much. And then after that, sometime, I think, the next summer, I would see him around school and say hi. Sometime around the next summer, Bob started going to play miniature golf with him. And by that time, I was hanging out at Bob's a lot. So that's when we would hang out together. But
were you guys playing music together in college?
In my third year and Steve's last year, he would come over to my house. We had a big house called the Red House, and we had a lot of music equipment in the basement, and he would come over and play and jam with us, and he could really play his guitar, and that was really good. And we played some shows as a band, and he played. We did a recording at the radio station, and he played in this band called Ectoslavia. And can you hear that?
Yeah, I can hear you. You're a little muffled.
All right. So, anyway, I would say that I didn't really understand, have a real understanding of Steve fully until later on. I remember he brought over he had spent his own money to go to this recording studio outside of town and record an album of his songs with a drummer and a bass player that were in a local fraternity band called the Skull Tones, and he brought his tape over of the album songs he did, and I was really impressed. I was like, oh gosh, he can really write a song. I mean, these sound like it could be, on a real record. There was this band called Lake Speed. He sent his tape out to different labels that year. And I think the year he was gone on his trip or something. And he got a letter back from Frontier Records expressing some interest in it. That was about it. And then one of the songs was on like a compilation cassette from Indianapolis. But that was as well as he'd done, and that was as well as anyone could expect. I didn't know anyone who'd even been on a compilation cassette, so. I remember going to, he had a girlfriend the summer of 88, I think, and he lived in Richmond with her, and she really had him under her thumb, and her name was Trish, and I remember wondering why he was subjecting himself to. I guess I'd never seen anyone being ordered around by an older woman, and he was sort of unhappily trapped in that situation. But then I think that was right before he went to Middle East. But that just occurred to me. It doesn't really amount to anything. But
I'm curious.
I don't.
Sorry, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. I'm just curious when the Silver Juice came to be, like, and was it always your kind of intellectual direction, like your kind of overseeing of that concept from the beginning?
It was. Yeah, it was. It would be, at the end of the time in the first apartment, and then in the second apartment, mostly. At the end of the time of the first apartment.
In Hoboken.
Yeah. We would make up funny songs just on the spot, and I would usually come up with the idea for the song, and then we would just launch into it. And Bob had met a girl who worked at Pier Platters, and he was dating her. And her ex-boyfriend had been Steve Shelley. And so from her, we got Sonic Youth or Thurston and Kim's home phone number. And so that was one thing that we first started doing was we would call, when we come up with a song, we wouldn't really record it. We hadn't gotten to that point yet. We would call someone, oh, that's good. Let's call so-and-so and do it into the phone. And so we would call a friend or someone we knew, and we would often call the Kim and Thurston number. And I don't know if they were on tour or what, but we would play into their machine for a long time, and it wouldn't turn off, I don't think. And, of course, later, we joke about it when they became friends with Steve. But, so doing it in the answering machine was sort of became part of the way the band was described at first when we put out the first record, so that it gave it a rationale. Like, they started recording personal answering machines, and that was like almost implying that these recordings you would record through a phone to an answering machine and then go retrieve the recording from the answering machine. And that seemed to me an extra step of distance in between whatever was considered lo-fi. So, once we moved down the hill into Hoboken to Willow Avenue, I'd start to tape them, and that would just be on a handheld sort of Walkman with a chord function on cassettes, and it was just same type of deal. Like I would pretty much always start with the idea, and they would be, they would never just start like, it never had anything to do with like music or a riff, like, oh, this sounds good, let's do something on top of this. It turned out that that's a really hard way to write a song. It's really fast to write songs to design if it begins with the title or the concept, and you just immediately can start. Because we can just talk off the top of our heads, we can't, and you can play along with your talking, but you can't like play something and then guide your talking to it. I don't know why, but so it would be simple. Like, this song is going to be like, what would be like a fun, enthusiastic music theme song for like the Canadian Tourist Bureau, and then it would happen pretty quickly. You would come up with Canada, and the Walnut Falcon. A lot of times we'd be playing, and of course, smoking a lot of weed, and have maybe the TV light would be the only light on, and I think there was a PBS show with birds, and so that was the idea for the Walnut Falcon, like something, a little ponderous, PBS documentary about birds of prey. Okay, let's try that. Or the next to the last song on the Time After the Reef was during the Gulf War, and so we're watching that, and we're like thinking, oh, let's do a song that's like this is weird, like America at war for the first time since Vietnam. So what would like our Vietnam rock music sound like with references to this war? So, or just way more abstract, like I had written something in my notebook about the date September 1999, and in 1990 or 1991, 1999 had like this salience to me, like it was really weird. Like, what will the world be like then? It just, is partly a function of the numbers, like as we all went through when it turned, seemed to have some special feeling to it. And being in New York at that time, I didn't see, of course, and no one could, the tech boom and the Clinton years coming, which were sort of an era of good feelings. So to me, 1999 seemed like 8 years on of what we were having, which was, still the sort of New York as a negative hit, and, the Tompkins Square riots and things like that. So I almost wanted to. So September 1999 to me was like so far in the future that it was post-apocalyptic, and so I would make, in whatever way, I would make my point like that, and then say, play to this. And even later, then when we would do songs that I had written out beforehand, I still felt that giving those kinds of associative cues were a way for me to tell somebody how I wanted them to play, since I couldn't by other methods of the language. So that, yeah, it was, I would initiate, and I relied, on Steve. Steve would always be able to do his thing, which was to give its shape, and we would sort of, at the same time, just be going back and forth with the lyrics, or at the same time, it was, I think, we're a lot alike, and at that time we were spending a lot of time together, because we would go to work together, and then come back on the subway together, and go up the hill together, and we were both learning the same things at the same time about culture, and reading the same books, and so it wasn't that hard. I don't think I would do it with anybody else. We had the same sense of humor. Like, it was with someone else, I feel like if I would say, okay, let's do blank, there'd be some bumping of heads. But it wasn't really like that. It was just, it would happen really quickly. And I would probably say it was probably more due to his ability to, his mind's a lot quicker, and to sort of figure out what I wanted to do, where I was headed, and then sort of one up me. He was more sensitive to what was happening than I would be. It would be more headstrong and belligerent. So
I remember
it was. Yeah, go ahead.
You were describing previously this kind of split that happened when Watery Domestic came out, which was 92. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the making of the Arizona record. Did you have creative differences, or were you able to set them aside and, as kind of the leader?
No. It was like, it was just me. Like, I had all the tapes, and no one else cared. I mean, because Pavement was, so successful immediately off the bat. So I had.
What do you mean? So you had the tapes that you had previously recorded, and you made the Arizona record out of that?
Yeah.
So it wasn't actually recorded in 93 after Watery Domestic?
No, it was recorded before, in 1990, 91. 90 and 91. So it was, it just took a couple years for me to get around to thinking I could release it. But I think it was on the first Pavement tour that I met Dan Koretsky in Drag City, and he had heard Bob and Steve talk about the recording, so he asked me to send them to him. And then from then on, we had our own relationship. And then Pavement moved on to Matador anyway. But
was Dan Koretsky receptive right away? Just he heard them and he wanted to put it out, and
yeah, he was right away. I think that the first thing he put out was Royal Trucks, and then he put out a Pavement 7-inch, and then I think a Smog 7-inch, and then our 7-inch. So we were like the fourth thing he put out. And, it's amazing because he has really, to this day, I mean, he's coming to tell us in another day or two, but single-handedly has sort of made my life, everything I've done since then, possible. I don't know how, I just don't know how it still happens, but 4 times a year, a check comes from Drag City. I mean, I almost know nobody in the music business has ever had that kind of amazing consistency. You know, it never has been ripped off, never it's had a quarter blown off, or I mean, most people just are happy if something comes, they don't know when it will, and but Dan is like an unusually steadfast, and he used to live back then when I first knew him. He lived in Chicago on the corner of two streets, Noble and Erie. And I always used to tell him that was a perfect summation of his character.
Mm-hmm. So I guess I could rephrase my question for Starlight Walker then, because that one was recorded later, right?
Yeah, that was recorded in this in summer of '89, early summer of '89. I mean, 94.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the first real one. And by then, see, when Selena and Shannon came out, then I stopped seeing, I mean, all of a sudden Bob and Steve were on the road. And I was like, you know, I think I felt like a little left behind. And so that's when I really learned how to write a couple songs, you know, because when they were on tour, I had another little apartment in Greenpoint, and I lived there, and I made a tape of stuff. And that first tape, one of the songs from that tape is the last song on the Arizona record. It sounds a little bit more, it's on a 4-track, so it sounds a little less lo-fi. And when I was making that tape, at the same time, I got when I worked at the Whitney, Charles Wright, the poet who I'd taken classes with at UVA, he would come to the Whitney every once in a while, and we'd talk, and he said, you know, you should really try to go to grad school where James Tate teaches, because I think you would really get along with him. And so I just gave it a try, filling out one application to this graduate program. And, you know, they wrote me back and said, oh, we want you to come, you know, we'll give you a fellowship and waive your tuition and give you a little stipend. And so then there was no question that I would do that. And so while I was up there.
What years was that?
That was, I guess, I think I entered in 1990. I think it would be probably fall of 1992. Yeah, because I remember that while I was living in Massachusetts, a box of, I think the box of the Time After Relief taught there at the same time I got there. And
is it a 2-year program?
It's actually 3 years.
Okay.
And so I was there till, let's see, 92, 93, 93, 94. Yeah, so I was there through the spring of 95. And one summer, while I was there, the first summer I was there, I went to Washington, and my girlfriend's father worked at the Library of Congress. So I got a job in the manuscript division at the Library of Congress that summer. And that was like really mind-blowing. And that really it changed everything in sort of the same way that Whitney did, but it did for me historically what Whitney did for me artistically, and also the amazing access, which was somewhat like the Whitney also, because I could spend a lot of time in the stacks with the primary materials of like all the great Americans, in every sort of field had their boxes, and inside their boxes was anything from their childhood schoolwork to their laundry lists. And there, obviously there were indexes, and so I spent a lot of time fishing around that stuff and Xeroxing things and stuff like that. Having like access to like 600 boxes of miscellany from the records of the Confederate government, or Walt Whitman's grocery list, which was in one box, and there's Teddy Roosevelt's little pocket diary, little leather pocket diary he had. That one of the people there showed me a page from the early 1880s, when his wife and his mom died on the same day, and he had made this mark on the page, this really deep X mark, and said, "The light has gone out of my life." And so holding that stuff and really playing with that stuff just made a big mark on me. And so I went back to school and I kept writing. And the next summer, I decided to go to Oxford, Mississippi, and I decided to record a record, a Silver Jews record, in a real studio, Easley Studios in Memphis. And I decided that before I recorded there, I would spend a couple of months or a month and a half in Oxford and write the songs or finish them. So I did that, and I got this it was an old chemistry laboratory that was just a one-room brick laboratory sort of in the back of the woods, that on the property of a man who was a chemistry professor at Ole Miss, but who had been expelled for unusual teaching methods, and he had done work, like there were these old kennels in the woods where he kept the dogs that he trained to sniff out explosives and things like that. That was part of his research, I guess. And so I lived there, and Bob and Steve came down like 5 days before recording was to start, and we just played in there, and then went to Memphis and made the record, and it went really smoothly. It was pretty easy, and I was happy about it. And, it was, I didn't know why it was, it went really well. I was surprised that it was, there would be a record and it would have nice sounding things on it. But I didn't know, I would be happy if it was an interesting record that didn't sound nice. That's what maybe I expected, but it sounded nice, so I was surprised.
Did you have the record pretty well written, like the lyrics and the songs pretty planned out like later records, or was it sort of a hybrid of the earlier?
Yeah, not like the other records. It was less planned out. Some of the stuff, like the sort of noisy word collage, the country subway conductor diary, you know, that was made up at the time. And the introduction part is like 1 minute long. The hello, my friend part was really just, you know, at the very end, on the last day, the guys at the studio were like, you have one more minute on, you know, we had 2 or 3 reels of tape or whatever, and there was 1 more minute that's just not used. So, you know, do you have a minute of something you want to do? And so that was on the spot. So that would be sort of almost like, that was, you know, doing that first minute of Starlight Walker right on the spot was kind of like a little bit of a throwback to the earlier days and Hoboken days. And it's actually appropriate now I think about it, because after we came up with the words and the little keyboard or bass part, and the assistant guy, Davis, at the studio said that, you know, let's put a little pink noise over it. And so, you know, that'll just to fill in the you know, it'll make it a little dirty. And that seemed to me like, you know, perfectly a thematic bridge, you know, artificially putting a little noise there on that first song before the person would hear the pretty piano of the Trains Across the Sea. There would be some linkage between the Arizona record and that. And so, and I think pretty much everything else I had come together with, but I didn't mean for the last song to be instrumental. I just couldn't come up with any words for it. You know, so there were more, we'll see what happens, conditions, plans, then I would allow myself later.
So you were saying earlier that you were sort of feeling left out. You know, they were on tour after Slanted and Enchanted came out. Crooked Rain was about to come out. Could you talk about that parallel? Like, Pavement is rising, they're becoming more well-known, and how you were feeling working with them at that time on your music?
Yeah. Well, it helped me, I was always someone who, even as a young child, I always identified with the secondary in any group. So, you know, I would see twos all the time, you know, president and vice president, or Coke and Sprite, or, you know, whoever was the Super Bowl loser, but, you know, I often found second place to be a location of interest, and actually a place that I felt comfortable occupying. Maybe even more, you know, definitely more than first place, and definitely more than out of the running. So it solved the problem for me of, I guess, it gave me a role that I could live with. It's always been easy for me. I think that you know, I not only would I would say that not if I hadn't had such a close friendship with Steve and also Will Oldham, being two people and more in the last, probably Will more in the last 15 years, that I've never been able to I mean, there's different ways I could phrase it, but in some ways I can say I've never been able to feel important or self-important. I've never been able to feel like special. I would never let myself, and I always have the counter example of what sort of, you know, both of those guys are both, you know, serious candidates for, you know, idolatry. And I feel really comfortable in that position going, you know, like here in Nashville, like probably the person I'm closest to is Harmony Korine, and, you know, same thing, even more since the Spring Breakers movie, but I don't have to I don't have to be, you know, have false humility or feel embarrassed about or guilty about being or acting self-important or being treated importantly. I always, and so, you know, I mean, I guess that it's a little bit punishing sometimes because no matter whatever positive reaction I get to anything I do, it stands in relativity, and so I say, well, it's just nothing to get too excited about. It's just what I do, and somehow I don't know how it happens. It works, but I don't carry myself with the same sort of preternatural confidence that both of those people do.
I find it really interesting. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That?
I was just going to say, I find it interesting that Steve has always gotten this mantle of, like, eschewing fame or, you know, being indifferent. And it almost feels like you feel that way more authentically than maybe he does. He seems to be more comfortable in that role, is what I'm trying to say. Maybe somehow you inspired him to take that. Or maybe people are reading into it and it doesn't mean anything. I don't know.
I think that if you're in the sort of culture of the 80s music where you're not supposed to embrace primacy and you're supposed to, you know, be a regular guy, there would already be a stigma for him. And then depending on as you go through your careers, who are the people that are around you as you achieve your success, you know? And if there are people who show dismay for, you know, it's funny because Steve can't help but be a total winner. And it's almost spooky when it comes to, like Bob and I used to joke that when he was in the Middle East, he must have like opened a crack to hell or something and like made some deal, because even in games that are just pure luck, there's no skill involved, he wins them. It's spooky. Even like, you know, I remember when he went into a bar and won two tickets to Hawaii to see the Pro Bowl. And it just seemed like so perfect for him, because he's just so, first of all, it's the Pro Bowl, which, you know, Steve is so, he's such a winner that he's not a fan of some certain team. You know, he more identifies with free agents. So the Pro Bowl is just totally in his character. But of all the people who didn't need to win a free ticket to Hawaii, who could definitely and would be going on their own with their girlfriend anyway, it was Steve. And so it was just so typical. But yeah, he just like this 4 weeks ago in our fantasy football league, he won by 1 point of the last game. Now, he thinks it was me, but it wasn't me. It was this other guy, David, and I'm letting him think it was me because he feels guilty because I'm always or he feels creepy because I'm always saying there's something creepy about how he always wins, and since he only won by 1 point, and like these games are like 300-point games, so it's like he won like 312 to 311, and it had to do with just one play of the last game of the season by a player. You know, we like to think that, you know, the fantasy football player doesn't affect these millionaires on the field, but with Steve, like, you actually start to wonder. But he does win all the time, and so it's easy for him to downplay. It's like his natural heritage. He's like a natural aristocrat, so it's counter-signaling to just sort of be slouchy and say, oh, I don't care, because it's going to happen anyway. And he just found this crack in the rules where just about the time that he made his records, he like found an acceptable way to be, you know, to sort of project a sense of royalty in music that had been fiercely democratic, anti-hierarchical, but without signaling any desire for it. And so was able to have it both ways. And it's really probably the best, you know, description of Steve, is that he's always able to have things both ways. And it's always unclear about how intentional it is, or if there's something supernatural going on.
I'm curious how this impacts you, because the Silver Jews were always referred to as a side project of Pavement, and
yeah.
Did that piss you off? I mean,
well, it couldn't, because I didn't really expect to ever have any success at all, and more I felt probably guilty or worried that people didn't really care about the band at all, and that it was just a footnote for completists. So I couldn't really let myself feel too much anger, and also because there really wasn't any competition for what Steve was trying to do. I mean, I remember at a time in the early 90s, it sort of felt like Thibodeau was maybe more respected than Pavement or something. And it seems weird now, but that was like the only time I there was any sense that, he just seemed to have his own category. So it's easy to, it saved me from, I don't know, I mean, I guess, I think like envy is one of the, most people say is one of the most uncomfortable, worst feelings a person can have. And it always saved me from that. Maybe if Pavement had been more mediocre, I probably would have felt more envy, but how can I feel envy for something? I mean, I never, ever was ever first place in anything. And I was always a B student, and that was also, it was always also a trade-off. Not that I could have always been an A student, but I always wanted to do as little as possible to make it to second place. So, and that would be worth it for me, and preferable to working harder and maybe getting to first place sometimes. So, I never have ever felt like, I didn't get, I mean, I may have felt mistreated by some bad reviews or something, but overall, I never have felt that I didn't get respect in life or was somehow ripped off or overshadowed. I felt more undeserved, like whatever I have, I feel it's to a certain measure unexpected, definitely. Surprised, very surprised.
Did you feel like Bob and Steve really treated this like its own project and, respected you as a leader of this creative endeavor and took the time and just like came and did that as a separate project?
Sometimes. Since Bob didn't really play on the Pavement albums, I think it was important to him. And I think that what Steve got out of it was just being, guitarists, they always have this, especially if they're songwriter guitarists, they have this sort of wish to indulge an alter ego, which is a sort of the speechless Keith Richards guy over the side, because he's not so worried. That's the person people really love, not Mick Jagger. They really love the guitarist who's smoking a cigarette off to the side. And so when you're a lead singer and you're yappy and talky, it's something that it's just a role to play that's fun. And that's why I think it's very easy to teach Steve, especially in the beginning, more like this great tool, because he was just interested in, it was like these were exercises I threw out to him to fulfill, and whatever I chose he would do, and he was very equipped to, meet whatever I threw out at him as please translate this idea into what would you play on guitar to express it as an equivalency blank, and then he could do it, and then that would be a great foundation. And so so that was the most, it was the key to key to making Steve super agreeable was just telling him what to play. That was like the only time in life, like any other time you like said something to him or asked him for something or challenged him something, it would be difficult. Like if you wanted to borrow money or you were just wanted a straight answer or whatever, there would be some conflict or something. But in that situation, when he was in the guitar, he took some pleasure in fulfilling the request. And since they were just requests for songs that hadn't been written yet, so they were, I guess he took pleasure in that. And then there's also the relief from, he never found it easy. He still has a hard time writing words, and it's just something like he does at the last second. So he got to enjoy what he really enjoyed more than anything in the world, minus the part that he found the part that he liked the least.
So when you were making American Water, it was like the end of Pavement, and I know that from what I've read and I guess witnessed in some limited capacity, there was a lot of kind of tension. It sort of seemed like they weren't into it as much anymore, and like maybe making American Water at that time, would you say he had fun and it was like something lighter?
Yeah, he had fun, and he had fun, and I think no one was an employee, Everybody was their own person. And so he got to be his own person. He didn't have to. He's not comfortable being the boss. He's sort of like, maybe like someone like a businessman who goes to, who gets pleasure out of being dominated or something. Like, he's the type of person who's like headstrong, but would indulge a child who was telling him what to do just for fun. So anyway, so that's kind of like, he would like make me into sort of, around everybody else I feel old. Around him, he makes me feel young, like in a bad way. He interpolates me as a bratty younger brother type. Nobody else does that. So I would probably play along. And at the same time, I've never needed him, when you have a band, and I discovered this later, you realize that the other people in the band really need you to do things that aren't in your plans. They really need you to go out on tour when you don't want to go out on tour. They have their own reasons they need, their own financial reasons they need it. And I think that makes whoever's the band leader resentful at the end. Maybe in the beginning, everyone's just happy to be along for the ride. And then people start having their own needs. They're separate people. The whole idea of a band is ridiculous for adults, because the band leader really is expecting these friends of his to suppress their own issues, their own survival issues, and just work around what you decide is possible. And that may be, it doesn't even include saying, oh, well, we're not going to work for 3 years, so you can go off and do something yourself. It's just music. I don't know what I'm going to do, I don't want to have to answer your question about when I'll need you next. And I think, like, also when you see your friends, whether they fight you on it or whether they go along with it. If they go along with it, then it still creates deterioration in the relationship. So I think that as far as recording the record, it was his first time you ever recorded a record with people who weren't working for him. I mean, even the first record, Gary, the drummer producer, was, and after that, it was also a question of, I think, the tension of who's really playing on these Pavement records, and is there really a band playing, or is it really just Steve playing? And I don't know what, I mean, I know that off the record that it really was just Steve playing, and I think it was irritating in the end, it irritated me to read reviews and they'd be like, and Spyro's guitar comes in, and you're like, he didn't even play on the record. I mean, and people's desires to believe that there's this double guitar attack, So I think the feedback just is no longer congruent with reality. And the people get, I think it's something that I've learned as I've gotten older, is people become contemptuous of weakness in others. And when I was a kid, I did not understand that. I was like, how could people pick on black people? How could the Germans pick on the Jews? I mean, these are minorities, I tend to think of, like, as a kid, like, you're like, it's the bullies, it's the bad guys, but in reality, in situations where a group is around someone who's servile and subservient, they become cruel to them. And I think that's part of the politics of what happens when a group of friends, the chemistry changes and one becomes the boss. One becomes more important than the others. Others become replaceable. Like, the husband on Bewitched or something. No one's going to know. It's like, I saw my best friend Paz the other day, and she's playing the bass for the Pixies, and I was really happy for her. She's got this job at this huge. This band has so many fans, and I never even stopped to think, oh wait, she's replacing that woman Kim Deal. That's tough. It's not like she's just replacing a bass player. None of the fans to care about. So anyway,
can I ask you if you have any kind of parallel with ending the Silver Jews? Did you just feel like it wasn't fun anymore?
Yeah. I think that it had a lot to do with feeling obligation, and I think that that's basically what I'm talking about. Is you feel like you have to do blank for the members of the band, and or, that what was meant to be, especially like the Silver Jews was always just different people coming in and out. But for the live touring, for like 2 sets of live touring, it was the same group of people. And so then all of a sudden, the status changed of it became a band with the same people. And that's what, it never was that before. So then you disappoint people. And then when you end it, it disappoints people. And it shouldn't, it shouldn't, the idea is that everyone will have other musical jobs or other jobs. Please don't depend on this, because there were a lot of reasons why it ended. It set the stage for other reasons to help other reasons along when they came up. This solves a problem, solves many problems. Quitting will solve like 5 problems.
So I know it's getting late there. Can you answer a few quick questions and then we'll call it a night?
Sure.
So were you born in Virginia?
Yeah, Williamsburg.
And how long were you there before you moved to Texas?
Just a little boy. We moved to Western Virginia. I was there until I was maybe 8. And then my mom and dad got divorced. And my mom moved back to her town in Ohio, a small town called Worcester. And my dad moved to Dallas and started working for Steak and Ale, Bennigan's. And
did you live with your father? You moved to Texas?
Permanently, I moved there when I was 14.
So were you in Worcester before that?
Yeah. And spend all my summers and vacations in Dallas, and all my school years from like 4th grade to 8th grade, or 3rd grade to 8th grade.
Do you have siblings?
I have a sister, Carrie, and then I had 3 stepbrothers.
Is your sister older or younger?
She's 1 year younger.
Okay.
And then my dad remarried when I was living with him, and I went from living with my dad to living with my dad and my stepmom and her 3 sons. And that was weird.
If you could just name a few musicians who really inspired your songwriting style, who would they be? Just off the top of your head.
There's the ones you want to say and the ones that are probably true. I would probably say that one of the first ones, because of my father's taste and because he would play it all the time, would be Jimmy Buffett. And I just thought it was really funny. I mean, I'd never heard music that was that lyrically charismatic. Cheeseburger in Paradise, and changes in latitudes, changes in attitudes. And then later, I think well, I mean, there's just so many different stages, but I think definitely Marky Smith as far as the other pole of clarity and poetry. And then I would say, in some ways, David Allan Coe opened up a lot of things for me. And maybe really
It doesn't have to be exhaustive. If you think of anything else, you can just write me and send me.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the questions in there, right?
Yeah.
I'll answer that one more thoroughly, because really the only I'm never able to go over in my mind. I'm never able to think straight on questions about predecessors. Maybe because of the anxiety of influence, and you have to fight through whatever different walls you put up to deny who your real influences are. But I'd like to answer it honestly.
Sure. We'll take your time on that. The proposal's due March 3rd, so I'm going to be working on it for the next month. And,
okay.
You know, that might not be absolutely essential for this part, but I might include some of that in the beginning to set the stage. So if you think of anything, you know, as far as like the books.
Well, I'll definitely answer those questions for you this week.
Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to ask you about is, I've been doing research to see what else has been written or produced, like movie-wise, that includes, you know, information about you and your writing style and the Silver Jews in general. And I have, you know, there's some books that also kind of overlap and have a lot more to do with Pavement, and you're included in them. And then there's the Silver Jew movie. So I was wondering if there's anything in the works or anything I might have missed that you can think of, aside from the Slanted and Enchanted book, the Perfect Sound Forever book, and there's a 33 1/3 on Pavement, Wowie Zowie, that may have some material in it, but is mostly just the author's own life and a few interviews.
I think that definitely in the I've Googled, you know, Silver Jews, quote, Silver Jews, unquote, in Google Books before, and seen the what the guy in Wowie Zowie guy says, and
it's really dismissive, I think.
Yeah, it's really sensitive. Like, if I were their friends, I would have said that. And as far as I remember, I'm trying to think through the Google searches, there isn't really very much. I mean, the things you mentioned, I have heard, but, you know, I really don't think I can't think of anything that's been written about silver juice that was in any way extensive or comprehensive, even just in a periodical.
Mm-hmm.
I think for the last album, when the last album we were on the cover of this British magazine, Ever True has this British magazine that not anymore, but I can't remember what it's called, B-Side or something like this. And it was the first time we were ever on the cover of a magazine or fanzine. So it was always, a mixed blessing of being the side project.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great
so
for me.
Maybe in some ways people felt like they had covered it already in their minds, because a Pavement album had come out.
Well, that's great for me
before.
because I get to do I get to do it more of a service, I guess, the history and
Really, yeah, that's true. There's nothing. I mean, I would imagine that most of the 33rd and third books coexist with, beside some comprehensive bios here and there. I don't think this one does.
Yeah, so I think that's helpful actually for the pitch.
I think it's also a point in your favor too, as far as making a case for it being one of the books.
Yeah, and I've been reading a lot of them. I don't know if you've read any of them before, but it's so interesting, the diversity. Some are very specifically talking about the album, and some are talking about the whole trajectory of, the career that led up to this album, and, others are about the creative process. Like the Brian Eno one is really good. If you get a chance to read one, that's the one I like the best. So it's interesting.
I read the Celine Dion one, and I didn't get very far in the Aria Murmur one, even though I care about that record. And then my friend Joe, her niece, wrote the Smiths one, but I haven't gotten around to reading that one.
That one's interesting too because it's a personal narrative. It's like it has, the music is like the background music that was on at this point in his life. So it's like a completely different take on it.
Right. And I think that would be mostly permissible to do with a band that had been written about as much as the Smiths, and of course it's a variation on all the texts already that are there. But if it was, the Silver Apples or some obscure act, you would be, I think, it would be disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like it was to do the Smiths album and do it his way. It would be totally interesting.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for your time tonight. I enjoyed the conversation.
Okay, Paula. Take care.
Talk to you later.
Anytime in the next month, just let me know if you want to talk. It's fine.
Okay.
I'm a little tired today, so if it sounds like I'm unenthusiastic, it's just because I'm exhausted.
We'll get some rest. I appreciate you taking the time.
Okay. Okay.
Bye, David.
Bye-bye.